Genesis 6, when the human population on earth began to grow, and daughters were born to them, the Bene Elohim saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and took any of them they chose. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards, when the Bene Elohim went to the daughters of men, and had children by them. These were the heroes of old, men of renown. In 2002, a US Special Operations Unit, the Army Green Berets, encountered a giant hominid in the Kandahar mountains of Afghanistan. Their engagement with the giant left one of the unit dead, and the story of this engagement echoed through the rank and file of the Allied forces. The background to this story is that a military unit had gone missing in the Kandahar mountain range of Afghanistan. The Army Green Berets is an elite military unit, and it was sent in to hopefully locate and retrieve the missing unit. They had received no troops in combat notification. The unit had just gone silent and gone missing. Either they could be located and retrieved, or at least the Green Berets would find out what had happened to them. Well, they flew out to within 4 clicks of the last known location of that unit and searched for several days before they began finding evidence of the unit's presence in that area. And as they followed a mountain trail, they began to find bits and pieces of military equipment, and then fragments of military uniform, and then fragments of bone. Primed for a potential ambush, the Green Berets arrived on a plateau surrounded by cave entrances. Having taken a defensive position, the unit is met by a huge spear shot out of one of the caves, impaling Dan, one of the Green Berets. Suddenly, the assailant runs out of the cave, screaming and howling. A red-headed, red-bearded man of about 12 to 13 feet tall. The giant man pulls the spear out of Dan's body, only to be gunned down by 30 seconds of artillery fire. Two helicopters were sent out to retrieve Dan's body and the body of the giant, who it was noted was red-haired, had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. Now, this account has been publicly confirmed by the C-130 pilot who flew the giant's remains out of that location and ultimately to a research facility. And all this information was part of the original after-action report. Having filed its after-action report, the Green Berets unit was required to rewrite the report and to sign non-disclosure agreements to classify the details of the encounter. Now, the reason I take this account seriously is firstly because of who the account comes from. One of the Green Berets dispatched and involved in the engagement, and the C-130 pilot who has gone public 16 years after the event to confirm the details of this story. Secondly, because it's not the only account of giant sightings in Afghanistan from that period and in the years since. The reason a lot of people don't take the report seriously is nothing to do with the credibility of the witnesses or the sources, but because there is a ridicule factor around any story of giants in the 21st century. Now, it wasn't always the case, but right now our culture is in a place where any story of a giant encounter has to be treated as a joke. And even people who have credible information from credible witnesses who wish to tell this story, very often they'll do it, but treat it in a joking way because they think people simply won't accept a story about a giant in the 21st century. I have a third reason to take this story personally, and that is the number of people who have come to me personally with first-hand experiences of this kind and second-hand experiences of this kind. Now, if you are in the defense forces and you have an anomalous encounter like this, it is your responsibility to log the account, just as the Green Berets did on this occasion. Now, you may be asked to redact it. You may be asked not to file a report from time to time. But usually the first step is you log it, and the second step is you never talk about it again. Where does that leave the people who've had these experiences? And so from time to time, I'm contacted by people in the military, people who are veterans, people who've been in the theatre of war. And very often they'll say, I need to get my head around something I've been hearing from my peers. That's often how it's framed. Because once you've had that encounter, you can't ask the higher-ups about it. You must never talk about it again. So you can only talk to very trusted peers. And once you've done that, where do you go? And it was for this reason that from the 1960s on, Erich von Däniken would have people in the military, in the defense forces, in NASA, come to him with questions about the credibility of reports they were hearing, or maybe even to process things they'd experienced themselves. They couldn't go to the higher-ups, they could talk to their peers, and after that they had to go outside the organization, even to the extent of Erich von Däniken being invited to come and speak to groups of people within NASA about the research he'd been doing at that time. Barry Dowling in the 1960s had the same experience with members of the Royal Air Force whose job was to log UFO encounters, but then not ask questions about them. And so they would go to Barry Dowling and say, can you help me process this thing I've heard or that I've experienced? In the USA, members of defense who have anomalous experiences will often go to Linda Moulton Howe, whose catalogue of these kinds of experiences is probably second to none. Now that's my experience. Since publishing the Eden series, I have people coming to me in exactly the same way. And people who were engaged in Iraq and in Afghanistan have come to me with questions about anomalous phenomena that they or their peers have experienced while on active duty. And they ask me, what's the credibility of it? And for that, I go to my own field of research, which is ancestral narratives. And if we're asking the question, is there any credibility to the idea of contact between Homo sapiens and other forms of hominid, some of whom may be smaller, some of whom may be much larger? If we listen to our ancestors, yes, there's every credibility to that.